It's March 21st, and the strange side of history awaits. Today, we have a pope crowned with a paper crown in exile, a prison that became more haunting after it closed, and a law that tried to outlaw evolution. Let's begin. On March 21st, in the year 1800, inside a quiet monastery in Venice, a new pope was crowned, but the crown itself was not made of gold, silver, or jewels. It was made of paper. Just 2 years earlier, Napoleon's armies had stormed Rome, churches were stripped, treasures were seized, and the aging pope, Pope Pius VI, was taken prisoner. He died far from the Vatican in exile, leaving the Catholic Church leaderless and scattered. With Rome occupied, the cardinals gathered in secrecy in Venice. There, after a month of uncertainty, they elected the new pope, Pope Pius VII. But there was one problem. The traditional crown, the tiaras used for centuries, had been looted or destroyed. So when the day of coronation arrived, craftsmen hurried to construct a papier-mâché tiara wrapped in silver cloth and decorated with borrowed jewelry from the Venetian noble families. Inside that dim monastery, a fragile crown was placed on the new pope's head, symbolizing a church that had been stripped of its power, wealth, and home. Pope Pius VII grew fond of the humble crown. It was lighter than the heavily jeweled tiaras that would follow, and even after Napoleon later sent him a lavish replacement, one made from gems taken from earlier crowns, the new tiara was almost reportedly too heavy and too small, almost like a quiet insult. For years afterward, the Pope sometimes returned to the strangest crown in papal history, and today, the tiara is stored in the Vatican collection. On March 21st, 1963, the most feared prison in America fell silent. That morning, U.S. Attorney General Robert F. Kennedy ordered the closure of Alcatraz, a fortress of steel and stone that had held some of the country's most dangerous criminals for nearly 3 decades. For years, Alcatraz had been called the Rock, a prison surrounded by freezing water, deadly currents, and a belief that no one could escape. But in the early 60s, the island itself had become a problem. Fresh water had to be barged in, nearly 1 million gallons every week. Salt air built up on the prison walls. The buildings were slowly rotting in the middle of the San Francisco Bay. Keeping the prison alive had simply become too expensive. So one by one, the last inmates were transferred away, and on the final day, just 27 prisoners remained. The last man to walk out reportedly turned and said, Alcatraz was never good for nobody. Yet closing the prison didn't end its story. In fact, it made it darker. When the prison shut down, Alcatraz was left empty. The cell doors open, the corridors echoing, with nothing but wind and waves and the memories. Today, tourists walk the same corridors once held by America's most dangerous inmates, but many say the island still feels strangely unfinished. On March 21st, 1925, something strange happened in the state of Tennessee. With the stroke of a pen, Governor Austin Peay signed a law that turned a scientific idea into something forbidden. The law was called the Butler Act, and it made it illegal for public schools to teach that humans evolved from earlier life forms. In other words, teaching evolution, the same theory discussed in laboratories and universities around the world, could now cost a teacher their job. Suddenly, science itself became controversial, even dangerous. Classrooms across Tennessee fell into a strange silence. Teachers who once discussed the idea of Charles Darwin now had to avoid them completely. The theory of evolution was treated almost like contraband, something that could not be spoken of openly. Just months later, a young teacher named John T. Scopes deliberately tested the law by teaching evolution anyways. But what followed became one of the most famous courtroom battles in American history, the Scopes monkey trial. For the first time, religion, science, and the law collided under the bright lights of a national spectacle. For decades, the Butler Act remained in place. Nearly 42 years passed before the law was finally challenged again, and in 1967, another Tennessee teacher, Gary L. Scott, was fined for violating it. His lawsuit forced the state to confront the law once more, and soon after, Tennessee quietly repealed the Butler Act. For over 4 decades, the state had done something almost unbelievable. It had tried to outlaw evolution. Another day, another strange bite from history. Like, comment, and subscribe. Your next eerie dose is just a day away.